because we did something a little bit different, and we shared what's called a cardboard testimony. There was about several dozen. I'm not sure if anybody actually counted how many people got up.
You can go to my YouTube site.
I'm sure you could go to your YouTube site and count everybody as they go across. But I'm sure there's probably somewhere 30, 40, maybe even 50 people walked across the stage sharing their cardboard testimony. But if you weren't here and you're just, what in the world is a cardboard testimony? Let me explain it to you. First off, you take a big sheet of cardboard, and on one side of it you write down a short word or phrase that describes what your life was like before meeting Jesus, before God. And on the other side of it, you write down what your life is like now that you met God, now that you know God, now that Jesus has touched your life, and now that He's healed your life. And so on mine, as you can tell, I started out with a bitter heart, and now I have a loving heart. And to give a little bit of background on where I came from, I have no idea where the bitterness and anger came. It's passed beyond where my memory was. My parents divorced when I was 9, and I grew up predominantly in the life that I can remember in a single-parent home, because right at that point, when I was 9, my mom, sister, and I moved across Canada, and pretty much all through my high school and college life, I struggled with just a deep-seated anger and bitterness. And it wasn't until I moved to Idaho after graduating and found the experience, and actually got plugged into a small group, that healing began. There's some people who are in that small group here in the room today. It's a DVD-based class called Returning to Marital Intimacy, and it might sound a little strange. Most of you know that I'm married now, but I took this class full of married people as a single person with no significant other on the horizon. This was before Susie had come into my life, and while it just sounds strange to share it, it was exactly where God wanted me, because God was able to start a process of being able to take my bitter heart and recreate it, reform it, renew it into a loving heart. And I don't know about you, there was a bunch of people who shared their cardboard testimonies, but when you are part of the service, or when you watch a service like that, there's two different conclusions that you can draw, or two different questions that might pop into your head. The first question, and this is mostly for people who might not have come up and shared, is, what about me? Like, I see all of these people, Jesus has touched their life, but what about me? The other question, and it's possibly what many of the people who have got up and shared was, and I kind of have a little bit of this question nagging around in the back of my head, at least on a much bigger scale, is, now what? Mm-hmm. Like, I know where God had me, or no, I remember where I was before God, and then I know how God has healed me, but now what? Mm-hmm. And I want to take a few minutes this morning and maybe theorize an answer to the question. And I want to say that the answer is a little bit similar, or a very similar answer could be used for both questions. And the answer is simply stepping out. What you might call it stepping out in faith. I want to say it's stepping out while there's still hope. Because as we see the world around us, there's no shortage of ways that we can just kind of, or things that we can see that just make us wonder, why, God? Like, what in the world are you doing? Like, why is all this bad stuff happening around us? Like, we flip on the TV, we see the news, we hear it on the radio. Like, there's no shortage of bad news floating around the internet. And it kind of has this nagging, like, what in the world is going on? Why is, as the world develops technologically, why is it seeming as though, like, our society is just continually going downhill? And really, God, we might ask, when is enough enough? actually finally going to come back. And really, I'm not going to come up here and date set, because that's totally not any, I have no idea. The Bible specifically says nobody knows the day or the hour, so I'm not going to go there. But I am going to share with you a little bit of an insight that I found in a story in the Old Testament. In an interaction that God has with a man named Abraham that gives us a little bit of a picture about maybe God's perspective on this idea. When does hope actually run out in God's mind? Because each of us may have a different idea of when we've actually lost hope, like when the actual cutoff line is. But has any of us actually thought about what that might be like from God's perspective? And so we're going to turn in our Bibles, or open up your smart devices, your tablets, your iPhones, or any other application that you might have that's the Bible and not Facebook. And look up in Genesis, the first book of the Bible, chapter 18. And we're going to introduce ourselves to a man named Abraham. And while you're flipping to Genesis 18, let me give you a little bit of background on Abraham. Abraham was a man that God called from a distant land to really a distant land for him, but from our perspective here in North America, it's distant land to distant land. But God called him away from his family to move to a distant land to ultimately become the father of the Jewish nation. And Abraham and his wife and his nephew Lot moved across the desert, or around the desert, over to what's now modern-day Israel, Palestine, that area. And with the promise of a new life. A lot of stuff happens, and a lot of stuff that we won't cover, but basically Abraham and Lot both independently become very wealthy, and it becomes evident that they actually aren't going to be able to live near each other. Some of us might have extended family members that we can relate to each other, but we just can't live near each other. And this might have been what Abraham and Lot ultimately was. It's like, well, we can get along, but we just can't live in the same neighborhood, or maybe even the same state, or we might need a couple states between us. And so Abraham and Lot decided that they were going to part ways, and Abraham and Lot go up on a hillside and say, okay, well, which area do you want? Because there's plenty of room here. And Lot chooses a valley that's likened to the Garden of Eden and how fertile it is, that has the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah in it. And Abraham stays up in the mountains. And some more stuff happens, and as a prelude into the story that we're going to look at in this dialogue with God and Abraham, God comes down in the form of a man, and two angels come with him, and they come and meet Abraham, and Abraham invites them in, they eat supper, God promises Abraham a son, but then as they're finishing their meal, they get up to continue walking because God is actually on his way to visit the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so that's where we pick up in verse 18. And then they're walking, and then the other men turned and headed towards Sodom. This is the two angels. But the Lord remained with Abraham. Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away both the righteous and the wicked? Abraham kind of already knows what's going to go on, because Sodom and Gomorrah had a pretty intense reputation. And looking at outside of biblical sources, like Jewish tradition and some of the other writings that archaeologists have found in that time, we learn a little bit about really actually how bad Sodom and Gomorrah was like. Sodom and Gomorrah was the epitome of a culture that had taken the idea of like insider focus and completely took it to the nth degree. Anybody who was an outsider was worthless, less than nothing, and anybody who was considered poor was even less. It was a society, they lived in such a lush valley. They were, in several parts of the Bible it says that it does liken the valley to the Garden of Eden, and in several places it says that this valley was actually given to the people who lived there as a blessing that they were to use to bless others, but they completely denied that right and instead completely turned inward focus. And if you were an insider, great. And if you were an outsider, then you probably should stay away, because pretty much they crafted all the laws, everything about the entire culture around the valley of Sodom and Gomorrah and the other towns that were there was crafted in such a way that said, stay out. What's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, and as long as we don't interact with each other, then we can get along. But as soon as you want to interact, then all bets are off. Tradition also has that the reason why God actually came down, and we want to flip to verse 24. Okay, never mind. Go back. I wasn't sure whether it was which verse it said. God comes down and he says, I've heard an outcry from the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and I'm not... Verse 20? Okay, go back to verse 20 for a moment. It'll take a second. Going back is not as easy as going forward. And God said, basically, like, I've heard an outcry from the people, and I'm going to go down. The Lord told Abraham, I've heard a great outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah because their sin is so flagrant. And 21, I'm going to go down and see if their actions are as wicked as I've heard. If not, I want to know. What could be so bad that it actually reaches God? And Jewish tradition actually gives a little bit of an answer to this. Because in Jewish tradition, there's a tale or a story about this beggar who lived in Sodom. And he was an outsider, but for some reason or another, instead of torturing him, what they decided to do was they would give him, like, they call it an ingot, but basically it's a coin, and they inscribe his name in the coin. And what they would do with this particular type of, like, ridicule was nobody would sell to them with it. Like, nobody would give him anything for the coin. It was basically, it was like money, but it was worthless as far as anybody was concerned, and so he was starving to death. But as time passed, they were kind of expecting, okay, well, maybe he'll just move on, like just kind of move on, or maybe he'll just die. But as time passed, neither happened, and the city leaders are bothered by this. What in the world is happening? Until one day they catch. Some traditions say one young girl, some traditions say two. And the traditions that say two, one of it was like Lot's niece. But essentially, at least one young girl they caught basically smuggling dry, stale loaves of bread to this beggar. And to make an example out of her, and you might want to close your ears because it's a little disturbing, they covered her with honey, strung her up on the city wall, and let the bees eat her alive. And the screams of the bees eating her alive was what Jewish tradition holds actually drew God down to see if the rumors that he possibly couldn't even think were true was actually what happened. And it's pretty crazy. But as we get back to the story of Abraham and his interaction with Lot, we get a little bit of a picture of when God might lose hope. So let's put the verses back up on the screen. Maybe verse 23. Okay, okay, we can go there. Yeah, Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away both the righteous and the wicked? Suppose you find, and this is, Abraham's a little bit bold here, he's like, okay, let's find out a little bit of information from God. He said, suppose you find 50 righteous people in the city. Will you sweep it away and not spare it for their sake? Surely you wouldn't do such a thing, destroying the righteous along with the wicked. Now here's a little bit of the Abraham saying, God, come on, like, I don't think you're like this. Why would you would be treating the righteous and the wicked exactly the same. That's not fair. Surely you wouldn't do that. Should not the judge of all the earth do what is right? God, you should be fair about this. If there's 50 people, you should probably go in and at least warn them. And maybe say, hey, you have a week to get out, and then I'm going to completely destroy the city. And so Abraham has this little streak of boldness. He's a little unsure, but he's like, let me just ask. It's a question on my mind. Continue in verse 26. And the Lord replied, if I find 50 righteous people in Sodom, I will spare the entire city for their sake. Now, when I see that verse, you can go back to that verse for a moment. And when I see a verse like this, I'm like, okay, there's 50 righteous people, but really how big of a city is Sodom? How big of an area is that? Because I'm kind of a numbers guy, I like percentages, and so I'm like, okay, well, see, if it's 1,000 people in the city, then there's that, or if it's like 5,000. And I did a little bit of research, and I came across, there's really a bunch of different ideas, but the closest idea that kind of makes sense in my mind was that the city of Sodom was maybe about 1,000 to 2,000 people, maybe a little bit more in the Sodom and Gomorrah and the 5 towns or 5 cities that were in that area. It might have been like 7,000, 8,000 people. And so basically we're looking at about 50 people, and there's over 50 people in this room here, that if there's 50 righteous people, God is going to spare the entire city for the sake of those 50 people. Continuing on in verse 27. And then Abraham is like, okay, well maybe I went a little bit too high. And so he continues, since I began, let me speak a little bit further. Even though I put dust and ashes, like, don't kill me for asking this, I'm just curious. Suppose there are only 45. Would you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5? There's 5 differences here. So would you destroy the entire city for there being just, what if there was only 46 people? It's almost 50. Would you destroy the entire city for just 45 people? And the Lord said, I'll not destroy it if there's 45 people. And then Abraham, getting a little bit more curious, is like, okay, well, how's this going? And so he said, please don't be angry with me, my Lord. Abraham pleaded, let me speak. Suppose there's only 30 righteous people. And the Lord replied, I'll not destroy it if I find 30. And Abraham's getting a little bit curious here at this point in time, I can imagine. It's really, where in this entire, where is God actually gonna stop? And Abraham says, since I have dared to speak to the Lord, let me continue. Suppose there's only 20. And the Lord replied, that I won't destroy it for the sake of the 20. And then Abraham's like, okay, there's, let me just see here, it might be Lot. Then there's Lot's wife. Okay, let's see. There's Lot. I'm sure that there's probably some significant others in there. So then he finally says, okay, God, one more time. Please don't be angry if I speak one more time. Suppose only 10 people is Lot. So suppose there's only 10 people. There's got to be 10 people. And then the Lord, suppose there's only 10 people. And the Lord said, then I won't destroy it for the sake of 10. This is absolutely amazing in my mind, because as we look at this interaction, 10 people who are righteous, in God's eyes, is enough hope to spare all of the wicked. And that just baffles my mind. Because in my life, and in my mind, I often have the question and the doubt, what can I really even do? What can I do with my story? What does God have as a purpose for my life? I can tell you, as a little tangent side note, speaking up front was not ever one of those things that I had in my future, because I'm much more comfortable behind the soundboard. But really, we read this story and we say, okay, what is God thinking when there's 10 righteous people? But we see very similarly when Jesus came, he picked 12 disciples that whittled down to 11 as he died and was resurrected. And those 11 people transformed an entire empire. And really, that in and of itself baffles me. because as a church family, there's easily more than 10, there's more than 50, there may be like 70, 80 people, I'm not sure what the count is. And that's plenty of people for God to say, there's hope for this valley. But really, as we look and as we read, and I'm going to kind of summarize what happens with the rest of the story. The two men get down to Sodom. They meet Lot at the gate, and the sun's getting ready to set, I imagine, and Lot's seeing these guys. He knows that they're special, and he knows that they're outsiders. And really, the idea, or the only probable reason that Lot was ever actually accepted into the city of Sodom and Gomorrah when he moved in there was because of his vast wealth, his flocks. And so they saw him come, and they saw that he was rich, and so they're like, okay, well, you can kind of be here, but you're still going to be kind of an outsider, but we're not going to, like, as long as you just leave us to do our thing, we'll leave you to do your thing. And they kind of had this little working arrangement. But Lot saw the two men, and he knew that they were special, and he's like, come stay at my house. And the men are like, no, we're going to stay in the city square. And the city square was the absolute worst possible place to stay. Most people, or most cities had a city square, and it was a place for travelers to stay. But with a city like Sodom and Gomorrah that basically was completely opposed to any outsiders, if you stayed in the city square, it basically marked you as a target for harassment, any sort of sexual immorality, depending upon if you were a guy or a woman or anything like that, and for any sort of torture. Basically, their internal laws said that they could go as far as to kill you. And so Lot knows this, and he's like, you don't want to stay at the city square. Like, no, we're going to stay at the city square. And Lot finally convinces them they don't want to stay there, but enough time has passed that there's other people who had seen these two travelers, and so the entire city comes and bangs on Lot's door, and Lot pleads with the city to not do horrible things to these guys, but they don't want to listen to him. And that's the defining straw as far as the angels were concerned. And they said, okay, we're going to destroy the city at sunrise, get your family out. And if you read the story, I didn't realize this until I had read the story really closely, the angels actually drag Lot and his wife and Lot's two daughters out of the city. Like, they were taking too long to get their stuff ready. He's like, we got to go. It's happening at sunrise. And 4 people was enough to evacuate, because that's all that was found in Sodom who were righteous. And really, Lot's wife, her heart was still in Sodom, and she didn't make it out alive either. And there is a point in time that's coming where God will come back and He's going to put an end to all of this. But while there's still hope, while there's still a group of us here, there's actually a reason for us being here. What if our presence, our rubbing shoulders with people who we work with, our presence in the company, our presence in Meridian, our presence here in the Treasure Valley, is what's actually giving the rest of the Treasure Valley a chance? What if we are the hope of the Treasure Valley? What if, while there's still hope, we understood that the Treasure Valley is being spared for our sake? Really, we could even say that the whole United States is being spared for the sake of a small group of righteous Christians. Amen. What if we figured out what to do with that? What if we learned how to go about sharing our stories with others? And my story is, in my mind, and everybody really kind of thinks this, my story, a bitter heart to a loving heart, it really seems a little bit too simple. And oftentimes we take a look at our story and we say, that's just way too simple. But what might be simple and what we might over-rationalize in our own life is really what God is going to use to transform somebody else's life. And as the band comes up to sing a closing song, just think about what your presence, what my presence, what each of our presences about our day. Think about what each of us could be doing to share our story, whether it be at work, at the store, like among friends, because while there's still hope, we still have a chance to change lives. And in 1 Peter, we read that people kind of were wondering, okay, what's God, what's taking so long? And it says that God isn't being slow for His sake, He's being slow for our sake, so that everyone will come to repentance. I think it's 1 Peter 3, maybe 9 and 10, somewhere in that frame. And really, while there's still hope, we still have an opportunity to share.